that, while not perfect, has helped deliver prosperity for a country for decades, is over. These are tragedies, but it's also our new reality.
President Trump casts tariffs as a way to punish countries he believes have been unfair to the United States. But economists argue that the cost is borne by U.S. importers, who inevitably pass on that additional tax to the consumer. I'm Sherwin Bryce Pease in New York.
And that brings the time to 30 minutes past 9. So we talk about an article written by freelance journalist Syrian Ryan on MoneyWeb. He says, there is no question about it that former President Thabo Mbeki was South Africa's best performing leader based on measures such as economic growth and fiscal management. He surpasses Nelson Mandela, who came before him, and those who succeeded him, he says. And we talked to South African journalist Syrian Ryan about the ranking post 1994 in South Africa, the presidents and their performance. A very good evening to you, and thank you so much for speaking to us.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
So what sparked this article? It's got to come from somewhere. What made you think, let's have a look? Is it the 30 years of democracy milestone? Syrian, are you with us?
Sorry. Yeah, so you broke up there a little bit. You're asking what prompted the article?
Yes.
It's something that I look at periodically, and I last wrote about this in 2019. I thought I'd revisit the subject and just see how President Cyril Ramaphosa, how things have been looking a countrywide perspective. And really just looking at, parking emotion, and there's a lot of divisive discussion around various different presidents. I just wanted to look at the facts and the statistics, and so I picked up some of the crucial elements, some of the things that I would like to focus on to really show how things have progressed under different presidents. So if we go back to Nelson Mandela's time, that was probably one of the most difficult periods, because that was the launch of democracy in 1994, and Nelson Mandela inherited a country which had basically excluded black people from the economic life, or to a large extent excluded black people from the economic life of the country. So they had to integrate all of these people from the Bantustans, as they were known, places like Maputo, Tswana, and Transkei, and so on. So there was millions more people now being brought into the economic life of the country, and he had quite a challenge ahead of him. Mandela did pretty well. He built about 1.5 million houses during his reign, and he had a housing minister at the time who was Joe Slovo, who's passed away quite some time ago. And that was very much part of Mandela's mission, was to start improving the life of people who'd been brutalized, if you like, under the apartheid system. And he did pretty well at that. But what he didn't do very well at was things like debt to GDP and the rand. There was a lot of capital flowing out of South Africa at that time. There was a fear amongst the owners of capital, including foreign capital in South Africa at the time, that South Africa was going towards a socialist or even a communist system, so capital moved abroad. That was a bit misplaced. It didn't really happen. When Thabo Mbeki took over, a lot of that capital started to come back again. And Thabo Mbeki's reign, that was from 1999. He had a finance minister, Trevor Manuel. They were very diligent and very disciplined in the way that they ran the finances of the country. So you started to see employment, for example, coming down. Now, when Mandela took over, employment was at 20%. I don't think that's a very accurate measure, because the Bantustans had not been properly integrated at that time. But 20% over was considered high. One in four who were economically active didn't have a job. Then it went up by 1999, at the end of Mandela's period. That went up to about 25%, to 31%, which is where it is today, more or less. And under Thabo Mbeki, that started to come down to around 23%. So Mbeki created jobs. there was also the period, and this is kind of a carryover from Mandela's time, where we had the World Cup 2010. There was a lot of investment into football stadiums. There was the Gautrain train, that was the new train system that was introduced in the Johannesburg-Pretoria area. You had a property boom, and also you had a commodity boom. There was a lot of investment coming into the mining sector. So things were looking very good, and economic growth hit a peak of 5.6% in 2008. That was the highest we ever got in the last 30 years. And since then, I'm afraid it's been a downhill run. Mbeki was displaced as president of South Africa in 2007 by elements within the ANC, the ruling party, who basically wanted to get rid of Mbeki because he was more pro-growth, economic growth, rather than social redistribution. Then it was the era of, there was a brief period there where President Motlanthe took over, a very short period, and then it was Jacob Zuma. And I'm afraid things really got bad under Jacob Zuma, because that was the era of the Guptas. It was the era of state capture and complete neglect of the electricity infrastructure in South Africa and the rail infrastructure, which are the two key choke points in the African economy.
So let's talk about then. I mean, you've mentioned quite a bit going from Mandela to where we are now, but I want to look at the historical aspect of it, as in who inherited what and the transitional phase that they were in. Mandela, there was a great deal of euphoria, and you say, just judging from the social aspect of it, he did very well. You mentioned those social metrics of housing, electricity, water. When Thabo Mbeki took over, he then had to start the real work of establishing South Africa as a sovereign nation with its own nationalistic policies. And as you mentioned, he was at odds, particularly with the union, seen as too pro-capital. So I want to talk about just how important that is, the philosophical viewing of the leadership style that is commensurate to the period of time.
You hit the nail on the head there. That was during Thabo Mbeki's period. It was a time for very strict budgeting. And one of the things that we saw, again, which we haven't seen since, was a budget deficit. Now, the deficits, of course, this is where government spending exceeds what can be raised in taxes. Under Thabo Mbeki's period, and it was really the work of his finance minister, Trevor Manuel, working together with Thabo Mbeki, who brought that deficit down from 4% to 0. So we had a balanced budget back there in 2007, 2008. A lot of guidance coming from that period from international financiers, from the World Bank, IMF, and these international bodies. So they were very much guided by that. The idea that, we would have balanced budgets and austerity, which is a very, very painful word if you're in the trade union movement or you're part of the South African Communist Party, that was something that they didn't want to hear. They still saw too much inequality in the country, and they wanted to loosen up the financial purse strings so that they could get social revolution going at a much more accelerated rate. And that was really motivations. A lot of people would say, it opened the door to, which it did when Jacob Zuma took over, because the Guptas were very much front and center of that whole evolution. And all of the state-owned companies, dozens of state-owned companies, suddenly found themselves being tapped by the Guptas for various different reasons. But it was a huge looting operation that was going on at that time. So what the transition from Thabo Mbeki, who inherited some very, very good social measures from Nelson Mandela, after that, we didn't really see much improvement in terms of housing delivery, in terms of access to electricity, access to water. Under Zuma, it really was a period of very poor accountability. And that continued then on until about 2017, which is when Cyril Ramaphosa took over. Now, Ramaphosa came in with a cleanup, a very clean image. He was going to tackle corruption. He was going to get the finances of the country under control. Unfortunately, it didn't happen because you see debt to GDP, which is, by the way, another interesting statistic. Debt to GDP is really a measure of how much debt the government takes on relative to the wealth created in the country. And on Mbeki, that had been reduced from about 40% to 27%. But under Zuma, it shot up, it doubled virtually to about 50%. But under Ramaphosa, it went above 80%. It's now down to about 75%. So what that's telling us is that the state is making an increasing claim on the wealth created in the country. It's become a very, very difficult and expensive operation for the government to run because they're running all of these social welfare programs. Part of the reason for that was COVID, which huge disruption like people. So now you have 26 million South Africans who are on some kind of social welfare, compared to 14 million. It's back in 2010, and that's a huge burden on the treasury in South Africa.
I want to
and
talk about,
we see that right at the moment.
I want to talk about something very fundamental here, and which has been, we are told that it's the ANC that rules, as in when they are in governance, that there is no individual and therefore blame cannot be shouldered by one individual. So whether you talk about Thabo Mbeki, Kgalema Motlanthe or Jacob Zuma or even Cyril Ramaphosa, that the party takes ownership of the economic policy that it drives. How true has this been, just given the figures that you're pointing out? And I want to point specifically to the fact that Thabo Mbeki himself was an economist, and he differed with quite a lot of his peers about the ideological perspective that the economy should be taking.
Yeah, I think you made a good point there. This is not the result of a single person. The ANC has often been described as a very broad church, and it does. It has. You've got the Trade Cosatu, you've got the South African Communist Party, this tripartite alliance. So there are very strong labor forces within that are looking for, one thing is labor protection, and they want to see more social spending. They want to see the ordinary South Africans getting some benefit from the wealth that's created in the country. In other words, redistribution. And that's kind of the fight I think that we're entering into now, is that because one of the crucial issues that the country faces is this unemployment thing. And one of the stats I looked at was the growth in the number of new jobs created from 2010. So you had about 14 million people employed at that time. Today, it's about 17 million people employed in South Africa. Not huge growth. It's about a 41% growth. Just consider that China, since the year 2000, created 300 million jobs. A huge country with far bigger problems, far bigger logistical problems to overcome, and that's what they managed to do. There was some displacement there from the rural areas, and those jobs were just repositioned in the towns, in the urban areas. But in South Africa, we've been able to create nothing like that. And the criticisms of the current government is that it is far too unfriendly to business. And some of the aspects that are pointed out of black economic empowerment, for example, which is supposed to transform and redistribute wealth, but the stats don't really show a huge amount of success for the amount of work that has been done. For example, the black middle class in South Africa is now 7 million. It's double the size of the white middle class. Now, that's an improvement. That's a major improvement from Nelson Mandela's time. But if you look at other aspects of black economic empowerment, how many black people occupy leading positions in business? Well, that's about a third. And yet black people are 80% of the country. And this is why you have this push now for what is called the Employment Equity Amendment Act, which is being challenged in court by a number of employer organizations and by the Democratic Alliance, it's going to face a rough road ahead because, the argument being that we've had 30 years of black economic empowerment and the current trajectory is not working. What needs to be focused on is economic growth. That's how you're going to get better.
Thank you so much for speaking to us. I wish we had more time, Syrian, because there's so much to explore with you. But thank you very much for your time, though. Freelance journalist Syrian Ryan speaking about rankings in terms of the fiscal management of the country post-1994 presidents and their performance. Syrian Ryan writing this article for MoneyWeb. It is 28 minutes past 9.
Você é fluente em português? É apaixonado por rádio e quer trabalhar na África do Sul? Você tem documentos que o qualificam para trabalhar na África do Sul? Nesse caso, podemos ter uma oportunidade para você trabalhar no Canal África. Envie seu currículo e demonstração para Canal África at newsroom@channelafrica.co.za. Lembre-se, se você não receber alguma resposta nossa em 14 dias, isso significa que você não foi selecionado. Canal África, a perspectiva africana.
At the forefront, the most pressing issues on Africa World Hour with Tsepiso Makwetla.
Channel Africa.
And welcome to it if you've just joined us here on Channel Africa, the African Perspective. This is Africa World Hour. I am Tsepiso Makwetla. Well, we've been talking about rankings of presidents and their performance in South Africa. Well, let's look at how they got there, the democratic process. This time we talk about it from the Malawian perspective. This as the civil society organizations in Malawi are calling on the Malawi Electoral Commission to disqualify Smartmatic systems from the upcoming general elections, citing serious concerns over electoral integrity and public trust due to the system's controversial history. The CSOs, which include the Concerned Citizens of Malawi, Umodzi for Peace and Justice, Economic Freedom Movement and Malawi Freedom Fighters, Human Rights Association, Human Rights Ambassadors and the Center for Democracy Watch, have penned a letter to the Electoral Commission expressing dissatisfaction with the ongoing electoral process. For more on this, we're joined now by Joseph Pesci, the CIC of the Economic Freedom Movement and Chair of Malawi Civil Society Organization Coalition. A very good evening to you. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us.
Thank you. Good evening.
Perhaps we start with what is the Smartmatic system and what is it deployed to do?
The Smartmatic system has been entrusted by the Malawi Electoral Commission to run the whole process of elections, and that is including the registration of the elections, the transmission of results, and everything. So they have been entrusted to manage the 2025 elections. So in short, this is what I can say about Smartmatic.
Okay. And in terms, is this the first time the system is being used for electoral process?
In Malawi, this is the very first time for Malawi Electoral Commission to use Smartmatic. We normally use the manual system of transmitting the results. As you know, that Malawi is one of the smallest countries, and it's very easy to transport the results using the manual system. And that also, the two elections that we had in 2019 and 2020, we used the traditional system of transmitting the results. And the government that is ruling right now was ushered into the government using the very same manual system.
Okay, and what problems were encountered there? Because I see you are raising the issue of the voter registration system at the moment.
In the first place, during the process of registration, we have seen and testified so many irregularities. You find that some other names are missing in the system. You find that some other centers are missing in the system. You find that sometimes even if we want to verify, we are in short, I should say that we are already encountering challenges with this system of Smartmatic.
I'd imagine there would have been a rationale, a motivation for introducing the system to either have greater efficacy or just ensuring that the audit is more transparent and it is also more accurate. What were the reasons given for introducing Smartmatic?
The main reason of Malawi Electoral Commission to introduce Smartmatic, they are citing that we are now living into the technological world, so everything has to go digital. So it's very unfortunately that the Malawi Electoral Commission is not allowing auditors to edit the entire process of elections. Having that the regularities that has been already recorded, there has never been any auditor to audit their system. So we are saying, how credible is the results that will come with this Smartmatic? And we are also telling the Malawi Electoral Commission to say that recently we have witnessed violence, killings in Mozambique just because of the results of Smartmatic. So we are saying no to this. Malawi is not ready to shed blood just because of Smartmatic. And we are telling them we need to avoid Smartmatic as soon as possible. And we are asking the Malawi Electoral Commission to reject the system and move on with another system. For we truly believe that Malawi Electoral Commission can manage the elections within 90 days. As we witnessed before, during the time of the rerun, in Malawi, they prepared for the elections within 90 days and they were able to achieve their goals. And this time around, it's just a mere reform for them to make some changes. And they have over 120 days. And we believe they can do the changes that the citizens, the voters themselves want.
I'm just curious about the voters' role. Often that is a contentious exercise on its own. So who would be entering this information into the Smartmatic system? And as you say, it needs to be independently auditable.
The Malawi Electoral Commission, they are saying that their system doesn't need the auditors, and I don't know who will be there to audit this system. And that's why we are saying no to this system. We don't need this system. This system will only use to rig elections, and if this will happen, there will be violence. So we are saying no. We need private auditors, external auditors, to come and start auditing the entire processes, because we even have serious allegations that some other people, they are already working with Smartmatic in order to manipulate the results. And we as civil society organizations, we know them. And we are saying, why is it that the president is quiet? Is it that he is also planning? Is it that he is also planning to rig these elections? We are wondering to see the president is quiet, is not taking any action, despite all the callings that has been gone to Malawi Electoral Commission for them to make reforms, and as well as for the president to fire the make chairperson, because he's the one who has the powers to appoint and fire.
And just in terms of the National Electoral Commission, are they allowing access to all electoral stakeholders?
Can you come again?
Is NEC allowing all stakeholders access to the electoral process?
No, they are not allowing stakeholders to access the information in the Smartmatic system. That's where we are asking. How come you want to run the election for the members of the general public, the members of Malawi, and yet you don't want them to know how the exercise will go?
All right, so what solutions are you proposing? You've written a letter. What are you saying? You're making demands. What are you saying to the Electoral Commission?
We have given them 7 days to act within these days to make the reforms. If the Malawi Electoral Commission will not take any action, will not make any reform, we will ask the citizens who send us to speak on their behalf, to act. We have something big. We are planning to do something big. If the Malawi Electoral Commission is sleeping, we are going to make them awake.
So just how big is big? Are you able to give us a sense of which direction you're looking in that big pronouncement you're going to make?
We will not allow anyone to compromise the hard-earned democracy. And we are going to do everything possible for them to listen to the owners of these elections.
And I'd imagine...
The main commission...
Yes, go ahead.
The Malawi Electoral Commission has been is there to work for Malawians, to manage Malawians' elections. So the owners themselves, the ones that we are speaking on behalf, they will act this time around.
And for the citizens of Malawi to be able to understand what you're fighting for and support you in your mission, they would have to have adequate or more enhanced voter education. What is the current situation with regards to that?
Every Malawian knows what is happening. Malawians, they know how we used to vote. And the Malawians, they understand the history of Smartmatic in all the countries that this company has been operating. And the Malawians, they know. And I wanna tell everyone that Malawians are no longer sleeping. We will close all the Malawi Electoral Commission offices, and no one will be allowed to work there until they meet our demands.
Well, we thank you so much for your time. Joseph Pesci is the CIC of the Economic Freedom Movement and chair of the Malawi Civil Society Organization Coalition. They are appealing to Malawi's Electoral Commission to disqualify the Smartmatic systems, even pointing to the electoral outcome which led to bloodshed in Mozambique as a result of the problematic way in which is operated, and the results is in the outcome thereof. Well, we'll leave it here for now. It is 20 minutes to 10. We're going to take a quick break and we're back shortly.
Africa, meet Abedi.
Yeah, that's me.
Abedi is a music lover through and through.
I really love African music.
He's got a taste for all kinds of tunes and spends his days listening to Channel Africa. Guess what? He didn't know.
Okay.
Channel Africa wants to help Abedi and all music lovers everywhere to discover even more incredible music. That is why Channel Africa is calling on all African musicians to submit their music. Musicians, remember to give us all your relevant information. Make your submissions at music@channelafrica.co.za. Submissions are your chance to be heard on radio. But sadly, they do not guarantee that you will be playlisted. All submissions will be carefully reviewed to see if they meet our station's requirement. Channel Africa, the African perspective. Africa World Hour. Africa World Hour. Unpacking global headlines from an African perspective.
And we're back here in South Africa as the country prepares to host the G20 summit. One of the largest commercial banks, ABSA, today hosted the launch of a G20 Empower Alliance in Johannesburg under the theme Uhuru, Women Building Sustainable Income and Financial Independence. This is an initiative focused on promoting the active participation of women in decision-making and management within the private business sector, particularly within G20 countries. As gold and diamond sponsors of the G20 South Africa and B20 South Africa, respectively, ABSA is a driving force in shaping policies that unlock Africa's economic potential, starting with women and youth. For more, we're joined by Managing Executives for Marketing Operations at ABSA Bank, Tina Venter. A very good evening to you, Ms. Venter. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the opportunity.
So what can you tell us about the launch of this G20 Empower Alliance? What exactly is it, who is in it, and what does it hope to achieve?
So today we partnered with the G20 on the Empower Alliance initiative. Achieving Africa's development ambitions is entirely within reach when we prioritize women's economic empowerment, not as a moral imperative, but as economic strategy. Women's leadership is not a peripheral. It's central to the inclusive growth, productivity, innovation, and social cohesion. So this W20, at a glance, is an official engagement group of the G20 and dedicated to gender equality and women's economic empowerment only 10 years. And that is the power of the G20 Empower Alliance. And under South Africa's presidency, this forum can move us from advocacy to accountability, redefining how economies can structurally integrate women's leadership, not just celebrate it because their story matters.
So you are saying that what you want to do is promote the active participation of women in decision making and management within the private business sector. What is the percentage of women who are not only in influential decision making positions, but who are just part of these spaces?
So today, only 9% of CEOs and 21% of board members across Africa's top firms are women. And this is not a pipeline problem, it's a systems problem. And involvement structures are too often calculated to linear male-centric career paths. So through this entrepreneurship, women can lead globally and starting businesses, yet they remain trapped in this low capital, low growth sectors. So this is not about lack of ambition. It's about the friction between potential and policy, between capability and capital. So unlocking change means shifting performance metrics, redesigning promotion pathways, and investing in sectors where women can scale, not just survive.
And before we get to the critical issues, I want to look at it from a policy perspective. One of the most criticized pieces of policy in this country is that of affirmative action, and people always perch their argument from the fact that it's racial discrimination, forgetting that it also seeks to deal with the gender imbalance and those who are from previously disadvantaged backgrounds so that they could have a seat at the table.
Yeah. So basically, if you look at why this ABSA partnered with the G20 Power Alliance, it's not just about elevating women, it's to rewire the very systems that have long excluded them. This partnership focuses on institutional leaders, equity and leadership, access to finance, infrastructure and policy, to name a few. But we have to build them. And as women, we have to do that. So that's no longer about empowerment. It becomes infrastructure. And this is how transformation becomes irreversible. And finally, when women thrive, economies don't just grow, they actually transform. So this is a greater, bigger kind of policy that we need to address.
And I'd imagine when you talk about the importance of infrastructure development, yes, you're talking about bricks and mortar, but you're also talking about the architecture, as you say, of the finance industry.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So across the globe, women lead in starting businesses. Yet too often they remain confined to low capital, like I said, and low growth sectors. And this isn't a reflection of their limited ambition. It's actually a result of persistent gap between potential and policy and between capability and capital. So unlocking these meaningful change means rethinking how we measure success. How do we redesign the pathways to leadership and directing investment to sectors where women can scale, like I said, not just survive.
So what other critical issues are you looking at to influence decision-making, policy-making? I mean, energy transitions is something that is topical because of the threat of climate change and the impact that it has not only on the environment but on lives as well.
So when we look at the data and why we actually supported this G20 partnership and South Africa having the presidency, it's about when women lead, in boardroom or in business, the returns are multiplied. The GDP rises, community strengthen, and social investments flow. But the real empowerment actually starts with, not just consumer progress. It requires systematic redesign. So as AXA, when we look at this, if you look at things through initiatives like we've got with Access to Finance Accelerator in Kenya, or you look at the Young Africa Works partnership in Ghana, and even the Innovation Hub in Zambia, we are building real pathways from informal to formal, from the margins to the mainstream. So to be clear, financial independence isn't the result of empowerment, it's the actual foundation of what we're trying to achieve through this partnership.
And I'm thinking of something like the agricultural economy, which most of the time is actually driven by women, and yet they are short in terms of being beneficiaries of such an industry.
So in a panel discussion today at the Power Alliance, there was a panel of women where this was topical. And basically what was said was, or confirmed was, that women need land, women need access, women need actual infrastructure, women need to be financially included in everything that we do, because we are the driving force behind what is actually going to deliver on the G20 narrative, but way beyond, and delivering on the legacies and leaving a lasting legacy for the generations that comes behind us. So agri is a massive focus, and even if you look at the task forces that APSA is involved in, agriculture is a very big topical point that we're actually addressing.
I want to talk about the trade and investment working group that you have there, given what is happening now with geopolitics. And it makes me think of, I was telling colleagues of a book that I started reading that talks about how the future of foreign policy is female. Is there evidence of that perspective in the current multilateral, financial environment?
When you look at the numbers, and to one of the professors that was on the panel today, is you should not steer away from looking at numbers, but what you should look at is the progress. So even when you look at how we are moving women forward, whether in boardrooms, whether in agri, whether in trade, whether in finance, that's the kind of achievements that you have to look at. So a very complicated question to answer, and I'm definitely not the subject matter expert, but what I can say is that there is actual proof to show in numbers that we actually can move forward, and we are moving forward slowly, but we have to start taking the lead from the front, because truly so, this is no longer about equality. This is about us taking, moving from that being proudly African and taking that by its horns and saying we own this, because we are entrepreneurial. Africans do make this world move faster and forward, and that's what we kind of have to do through the stories that we tell, like partnerships like the G20.
As you say, it's not just about empowerment, but it is also about enabling an already existing fact, the fact that, for instance, women make up the larger portion of population size in South Africa. And I think that is the case generally globally, that there is a younger and yet more female population. But it's about education as well. It's about employment. If you are going to say you're going to the G20 to drive the conversations there, what efforts are underway to ensure that there is a female perspective on how to build networks, how to create cultures that will ensure that women are there at the forefront?
So, seemingly simple answer, but what I can definitely say is that if you look at how the G20 and the B20 kind of structures are set up, whether from a Sherpa or a track or a task force perspective, where we say that women lead, we put women of power into those positions. And we take our young ones with us. And added to that is when we see how we represent in terms of being an active force for good and delivering on our purpose about empowering Africa's tomorrow together, one story at a time. It's one of those things where we're actually living this purpose. And by looking at infrastructure, we're looking at financial inclusion, we're looking at where, as we're getting involved in the task forces, we're partnering with the likes of the UN, with government, and all those key stakeholders, black business partners, councils, and all of that, to make sure that every effort is actually rewarded with action. Because no longer can we talk, we have to take action.
And the financial architecture, how could that better improve?
So from a financial architecture perspective, we are a bank, let's just be clear. And the possibility is there that we should have these conversations. But at the same time, we have to acknowledge that the world is ever changing. Even if we look at it from where we are heading in terms of technology and stuff like that, the bank has to transform and pivot and be agile in terms of what the new client is looking at, but not neglecting where we are. So financial inclusion is one of those hot topics that is heavily debated. But then at the same time is how do you make this available, for example, with the small, medium enterprises or the young entrepreneurs, putting them through these reams of administrative duty just to get them onboarded and giving them a gap in that market which we've got access to. Because let's be honest, as a corporate and as Corporate South Africa, we are in a very privileged position to open those opportunities to the next generation. And that's what we aim to do alongside everybody else that's partnering with the G20.
Thank you so much for your time. Much appreciated. Tina Venter, she is the Managing Executive for Marketing Operations at Absa Bank, and speaking to us about the bank preparing for conversations at the G20 with the launch today of the G20 Empower Alliance in Johannesburg.
Africa, meet Abedi.
Yeah, that's me.
Abedi is a music lover through and through.
I really love African music.
He's got a taste for all kinds of tunes and spends his days listening to Channel Africa. Guess what? He didn't know.
Okay.
Channel Africa wants to help Abedi and all music lovers everywhere to discover even more incredible music. That is why Channel Africa is calling on all African musicians to submit their music. Musicians, remember to give us all your relevant information. Make your submissions at music@channelafrica.co.za. Submissions are your chance to be heard on radio. But sadly, they do not guarantee that you will be playlisted. All submissions will be carefully reviewed to see if they meet our station's requirement. Channel Africa, the African perspective. At the forefront, the most pressing issues on Africa World Hour with Tsepiso Makwetla.
Channel Africa.
Now, Palestinians say they will always appreciate South Africa's efforts to ensure that Israel is held accountable over the atrocities in Gaza. This comes as the country has made oral submissions before the International Court of Justice. The World Court has begun hearings for an opinion on Israel's legal duty to allow aid for Palestinians into Gaza and to cooperate with the UN's Palestinian aid agency, UNRWA. Meanwhile, a global campaign calling for a week for Palestine has been launched in Johannesburg. Bonolo Maribe has more.
The untenable situation in Gaza is once again in the spotlight with the oral submissions before the World Court. The ANC Subcommittee Chairperson on International Relations, Nomvula Mokonyane, says the party will continue to support the Palestinian cause until they achieve self-determination.
Director General registered yesterday is that we stand before the court. Children are still being killed, pregnant women are being maimed, properties are being destroyed. Even Pope Francis in his last days, the only call that he was making, lying in his deathbed, was to call the people of Palestine and check if they are still safe.
Speaking at the launch of the Week for Palestine, as part of mobilizing global solidarity, some parties, such as Al-Jamaa leader Hanif Hendricks, says that the international community must not turn a blind eye on the situation in the Middle East.
We have to keep the struggle of Palestine alive every day of the week. Every event counts. So now that there is a focus event, the red card event, the idea is to get success after success until Palestine is free.
A number of events are planned for the week under the theme Red Card Israel and include calling for the suspension of Israeli teams from FIFA. This is Media Coordinator for Africa for Palestine, Aliko Mape.
Palestinians have requested us as the international community to have a sports boycott.
So it's very important for us to respond to their request. Getting Israel out of the football, out of FIFA, is very important given the principles of FIFA, the anti-racist principle, the anti-war, anti-colonial principle.
The United States of America, which is the staunch supporter of Israel, had their legal representative, Josh Simons, present the country's submission before the ICJ.
The United States supports the flow of humanitarian aid into Gaza, with safeguards to ensure it is not looted or misused by terrorist groups. We encourage the international community to focus on advancing a ceasefire and on fresh thinking for a better future for Israelis and Palestinians alike.
Meanwhile, France's legal representative, Diego Colas, says the situation is quite desperate in Gaza.
In Gaza, the entry of trucks delivering humanitarian assistance has been totally suspended since the 2nd of March. International organizations that are still present are warning us about the depletion of food stocks and multiple shortages of medicine. It should be noted that even in the West Bank, the increasing number of controls is hampering the intervention of human organizations on a daily basis.
Israel relaunched its military operations in March after the collapse of a ceasefire. The conflict was sparked by a Hamas attack on southern Israel on October 7th, 2023. Bonola Maribe in Johannesburg.
And that brings us to the end of Africa World Hour this Wednesday evening. I almost said Thursday. I'm in a rush, aren't I? So let's tell you what's coming up on Hotlines with Shayla Ndugumana later on. So they'll be speaking to Israel Radinuku, who is dancing a new future into existence. He's the founder of Israel Side School of Dance, and he is a shining star of the Sibanye Stillwater and Pagamani Impact Capital Youth in the mining program. So they'll be talking about that. And also because Monday was the 21st of April was World Creativity and Innovation Day. In light of that, the program will be putting a spotlight on a bold youth entrepreneur who's using original thinking to crack some of South Africa's toughest problems. And then also in that conversation later on Hotlines will be Tsepiso Makwetla, a 32-year-old tech innovator whose company, Thrift Online, uses AI to bring predictive maintenance and asset tracking to mining, while also building fintech tools that support townships, plaza shops, and tokenized agriculture. Well, that's it from the team tonight. From us, it's good night for now.